First, a few comments about our scripture readings, and then maybe something that we can carry home for today. The first reading in Deuteronomy, describing Moses, when that was written, probably the writer had in mind not a prophet, but a whole line of prophets. Yahweh was promising that there would always be someone to guide his people to speak his message. Over the centuries, it kind of faded. The prophets weren't so good, some of them. They went into captivity in Babylon. Eventually, this prophecy of a series of prophets was coalesced into the promise of one prophet who would come at the end. And the church picks that out for today's Mass because in the Gospel, Jesus is presented as teaching with authority. He is presented as the fulfillment of that prophecy. In Paul's letter, urging those who are married to stay married and those who are not married to stay unmarried, we have to remember a couple of things. First of all, he's writing to the people in Corinth, which is a sin city. It's a port, it's a commercial center, there's lots of prostitution. It had a very bad reputation. Secondly, he's writing under the impression that the time is short. The Lord will return any day now, any year. And so, if you're married, okay. But if you're unmarried, well, just wait a couple of years and Jesus will come and we'll all march off into heaven. Thirdly, he makes it in the extended passage, he makes it very clear that this is his advice. This is not something that he heard from the Lord. This is not part of the good news that we have to accept. It's only his personal advice. So don't get too scared. Don't get too scared. The Gospel, as I said, is from the early part of Mark. How do I want to say this? Well, one thing I want to say, Mark uses a familiar device. He starts off by saying, the people were astonished at his teaching. And he concludes by saying, all were amazed, and they asked one another, what is this? But then in the middle, he tells a story about a man who is possessed, and Jesus cures him. He starts with one thing, jumps to something else, and then comes back to this. It's known in popular language as a sandwich. Okay, you have a piece of bread, something in between. You remember the story of Jairus' daughter. Word comes that she's dying or dead. Jesus starts off, and then the woman touches him, and he stops and talks to her, and she's cured, and then he arrives at the house of Jairus. Okay? A sandwich. Mark uses that because the story inside illuminates the story outside and vice versa. Okay? It's a way of saying, yes, Jesus had great power. He cured this man. He drove out the evil spirit. He acted with power and authority. But he also taught with power and authority. Strangely, Mark will insist again and again that Jesus spoke with authority. He was a great teacher. People were amazed. But then Mark doesn't tell you very much about what he said. He doesn't give you a Sermon on the Mount, as you will find in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Matthew gives us 5 different sermons. Mark insists that Jesus was a good teacher, but then doesn't tell us so much about what he taught. I suppose in today's gospel, we see Mark in the constant effort to name the mystery, to name who Jesus is. He couldn't fall back on the Council of Trent, the Council of Chalcedon, the definitions of the church, all the theology books that you've been reading. Okay? He didn't have those. What they had was a lived experience filled with mystery. How do we understand this man? Who is Jesus? Who is he? At the very beginning of his gospel, Mark will say, beginning of the good news of Jesus, Messiah, Son of God. Under the cross, when Jesus dies, the Roman centurion will say, truly, this man was the Son of God. So at the beginning and at the end, Mark clearly identifies Jesus as the Son of God. In between, he uses a lot of other titles. Messiah, Lord, Son of Man, Son of David, many other titles. Trying to express who this man is. The fulfillment of the prophetic mysteries of the Old Testament. Today, it's the man possessed by the devil who identifies Jesus. I know who you are, the Holy One of God. It's not a very big title. It's not a very high title. But it's one. And the fact that the voice comes from a demon, from someone in the world of the spiritual, gives it great authority. Whenever someone from the spiritual realm speaks in Mark's gospel, it's always a very important statement. So Mark is trying in this small section to give a name to Jesus, the Holy One of God. Now, holy means separated, consecrated, removed from the secular, fully devoted to the service of God. Yes, it means all that. But I'd like to give you another definition of holy. It's an image that I read recently, and I like it very much. It's an image that comes from the circus. The people who work on the trapezes, way up at the top, and when the music is right, when they come to the climax, one will let go, fly through the air, and be caught by the other. One is the flyer, one is the catcher. And the first rule up in the air, if you're the flyer, be the flyer. Don't try to be the catcher. That's somebody else's job. You let go. You can do somersaults, you can do twists, you can do twisting somersaults, but at a certain point, you reach out and the hands are there to catch you. You fly, the catcher catches. But you have to let go and you have to trust. And maybe that could be our definition today. The Holy One of God. We're not asking you to join a monastery, to be separated from the world, but we are asking you, deep down, at the beginning of this new year, to recognize that if you want to be a disciple, if you want to be a follower of Christ, you have to let go of familiar things, let go of the way the world judges, and fly with full confidence that you're going to be caught. You understand? The man possessed said, I know who you are. You are the Holy One of God. Today, we can say, I know who you are. You are my catcher. No good for you unless you're flying.